Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leaders Insights with me, Claudine Caletti, Managing Editor at Forbes Middle East. Today, I'm speaking to Dr. Nasser Saidi, former Minister of Economy and Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Nasser.
Sure, pleasure.
Could you recap and just summarize for us what you think the unique factors have been this year and the impact that that's had on the economy and how it kind of compounded with the fact that there was uncertainty in Lebanon even at the beginning of the year?
Lebanon has been running large fiscal deficits, government borrowing, and current account deficits, i.e. it has been borrowing from the rest of the world. The net result of that is an accumulation of debt which is now around 175% of GDP. That's the third highest in the world after Japan and Greece. And these deficits and the buildup of debt did not build up any assets. It did not go into investment, either public investment or private investment. It went to finance current consumption and spending. The net result of that is that the markets lost confidence in the Lebanese pound. And the central bank, starting in particular from 2015, started borrowing heavily from the commercial banks and raising interest rates. In effect, the central bank was running a Ponzi scheme, borrowing more to pay the high interests on the debt it was accumulating. This bubble has now burst. And as a result of that, Lebanon decided not to honor its maturing debt in March, and it decided to approach the IMF for a rescue plan. The current macroeconomic situation is rapidly deteriorating, and let's give some numbers. The latest numbers for inflation are 55% rising to 60%. Unemployment now is around 40% on average and higher for the youth. The exchange rate has depreciated by some 80%, and we now have multiple exchange rates in the market, including a black market exchange rate. We're expecting a depression this year, i.e. output is expected to decline by some 15%. We've never had that, even in the worst times of the war during the 1980s.
But what do you think are the governmental and policy reforms needed internally to help the country move forward from where it is today?
Well, the IMF, the government has prepared a rescue plan, which it has presented to the IMF. In effect, what Lebanon needs is three sets of reforms. There's monetary and financial reforms, there's fiscal reform, and there's structural and governance reforms. On the monetary and financial, you need to quickly introduce capital controls. At the moment, there are informal capital controls, multiple exchange rates, licensing. All of that leads to abuse and distortions in the market. So you need to unify the exchange rate. The central bank has got to stop financing government. We need to move not only to unified exchange rates, but to flexible exchange rates. And then you need to confirm the independence of the banking regulators, the capital market regulators, and the central bank. The law, in effect, gave independence and immunity to the central bank. The central bank abused that and produced a Ponzi scheme. They should be held accountable for that. That's why we've also asked, and the government has also asked, for an audit of the central bank's books. The central bank has been resisting that because they don't want to reveal the losses that they've made. That's one set of reforms. The other set of reforms are fiscal reforms. You need to restructure the public debt. And that public debt is both sovereign debt, domestic and foreign, but also central bank debt, because as we said, the central bank borrowed, issued certificates of deposits, did all sorts of swaps and other exotic arrangements. That has to be restructured. And as a result of that, you got to restructure the banking system, because the banking system lent to government and to the central bank. And effectively, that debt is now worth maybe at best 30% of its face value. So you've got to write down that debt. When you write down the debt, that means you're wiping out the equity of the banks. And that means we have to rebuild the equity. The shareholders who benefited from outlandish profits by lending to the central bank at very high rates are going to have to bail in. They have to be bailed in. So restructuring of the banking financial sector has to take place. The third set, and this is the critical bit, is structural reforms, particularly areas like public utilities, electricity.
You've mentioned IMF a couple of times. As of today, I think the negotiations are currently suspended between Lebanon and the IMF. How do you foresee that moving forward, and what impact do you hope it could have?
Well, there have been some 17, 18 sessions, meetings with the IMF. Most of it has been around the numbers, trying to get an understanding of the depth of the crisis, of the losses of the central bank, the losses of the banks. The central bank in particular, through its governor, has been sabotaging these talks by denying the reality of the losses. So the IMF has been facing a disunified, non-unified negotiating team. Whenever you're negotiating with the IMF for any reform program, you need clear ownership. You need political courage. You need a strong government that says, I'm going to introduce these reforms. With those reforms, I expect you to give me a financial package. The financial package will help us with the balance of payments, restoring investment, getting the economy growing again, allowing the private sector to start investing, imports and exports working. And the IMF will usually ask for conditionality. We need that conditionality. Some of the politicians are trying to portray this as though this is foreign intervention in the Lebanese sovereign. This, of course, is political playing around. Lebanon knows what reforms. We know exactly what reforms we need. What we now need is for the IMF to tell them, unless you enact those reforms, nobody's going to be able to help you. Lebanon needs a package of some $25 to $30 billion from the rest of the world. The only way that can happen is through an IMF program.
You have a very unique and exceptional kind of history with your career in Lebanon and your insight. How are you using your influence and your role currently to make a difference for people and to help your country rebuild for the future?
Well, I've become an activist. I'm involved with several civil society organizations, particularly trying to bring financing to SMEs and to the private sector. We need to restore that, but also quite active on the political side with civil society, trying to say, well, these are the sorts of reforms that we need. We produce papers, we produce research, we go out and talk.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. I know that we're all hoping for success and a much brighter future for Lebanon. Thank you so much for chatting to us today. That was really interesting insight and quite heartbreaking. So I really hope for good things ahead.
We hope so as well. Thank you very much for helping spread the message.